Good morning and welcome to Deadline Press Agency's roundup of the top stories in the Scottish newspapers on today, Monday the 9th of November. I'm Oliver Faramond.
And I'm Rory Reynolds. Let's turn to the Daily Record first.
On the front page of the Record, Celtic midfielder Scott Brown was assaulted in Edinburgh on Saturday night after a night out. He was on Lothian Road, which is a scary place to be on the weekend sometimes. And on page 8 of the Record, there's a feature about Scottish politicians' favourite recipes. They've got Cathy Jameson, who's got some kind of pasta dish, Alex Salmond, who's made Cullen skink, and Jamie McGrigor, who's a Conservative MSP, who's got a recipe for strawberry vodka. And in the first part, it says Jamie advises that this should be consumed in moderation.
These are all part of a new book called MSP's Gut Feelings. And just a couple more here. Mike Russell's is lamb biryani, and Tara Scott's is stir-fried Shetland lamb.
Cash raised by purchases of the book go to the charity Marie Curie Cancer Care. A Susan Boyle story on page 17 of the Record. This is really good. In the classic clip that went viral and has something like 130 million views now, the girl who rolls her eyes at about 1 minute 24 has spoken out, speaking of her pain and anguish at being targeted by Susan Boyle fans on the internet. One posted a comment saying that she wanted to punch the chick at 1:24 in the face.
Jennifer herself said, all I did was roll my eyes the same as everyone else did, including Simon Cowell.
And the Daily Star of Scotland have another Susan Boyle story on page 14. Despite saying that she'd never been kissed before her iconic appearance on Britain's Got Talent, she nearly married a chap called John. He asked her to marry him and then changed his mind. She says he was a rather immature chap. Moving to the front page of the Daily Star of Scotland, Take That member Mark Owen got married over the weekend at a Highland church, but there's some controversy brewing apparently because Robbie Williams didn't show.
Mark Owen married his long-term partner, Emma Ferguson, and this was in Cawdor, near the Macbeth Castle. And they've just noted here that 500 fans travelled to the north of Scotland where it was -4 degrees.
Elsewhere in the Star, their angle on David Hay beating the monstrous Russian over the weekend. His 6-week sex ban is over, and they note that he went a few rounds in bed with his wife Natasha afterwards. Lovely.
On Saturday night, the British boxer beat the Russian giant Nikolai Valuev, who's 7'2" and 22 stone. But they've got a nice angle to this story, is that David told his mum that he'd be champion when he was just 3 years old. And a story on page 21 of the Daily Mirror. Princess Eugenie, the 6th in line to the throne, lost her security on a night out. And she went up to some coppers in the street in Newcastle and she said, I'm Princess Eugenie and I've lost my security.
Thankfully, Princess Eugenie's security was eventually found. Princess Eugenie is studying history of art at Newcastle University, and it costs taxpayers roughly £750,000 a year for protection during her 3 years studying at the university.
On page 1 of the Times today, they have a picture of Alex Salmond paying tribute to troops at Edinburgh. This is part of the remembrance ceremonies that occurred across the UK. A story linked to this as well. The Allied forces may quit most of northern Helmand province in Afghanistan. And just turning to their spread on page 6 and 7, pictures from around the country, including of the Queen, a little boy with a relative's medals here, and 2 veterans sharing a nip of whiskey. Just turning to the Scottish Daily Mail today, on page 6 and 7, they have a tribute to the fallen troops, and they have pictures from around the UK. The main one is of Prince Harry, and they're saying he's made his sombre debut at the Cenotaph, and he's dressed in full regimental formal wear.
There's a small controversy brewing about yesterday's ceremonies. Gordon Brown apparently didn't nod in quite the correct way as he approached the wreath, and he's pictured in the Daily Mail alongside David Cameron and Nick Clegg, whose I suppose their heads are more sort of fully bowed.
The Daily Mail just mentioned that on a sidebar there, but the Scottish Sun have splashed that on the front page and they've called it bloody shameful. They have a picture of Gordon Brown standing upright, and they've also noted how he got the name of a soldier who died in Afghanistan wrong.
The Prime Minister wrote the letter of condolence to the mother of James Janes, who died on the 5th of October in Afghanistan, and the Sun have actually printed the copy of the letter here, and it looks hastily written. There are a number of spelling errors.
Gordon Brown addressed the handwritten letter to Mrs. James, not Janes, and he also spelt condolences, colleagues, security, and sincerely wrong as well. Turning to a funny story on page 17 of The Sun today. This is by one of our colleagues, Michael McLeod, and it's about how Royal Bank of Scotland bosses at their Citizens Bank branch in America are giving out free donuts from Dunkin' Donuts to try and lure in new customers.
Last week, the Royal Bank of Scotland received a £25.5 billion taxpayer bailout and is now spending that money, it seems, on handing donuts to Americans for free.
That's right. They also give new customers $220 when they sign up to the Citizens Bank. On front page of the Herald today, there's been a big dip in support for the SNP in the Westminster elections, and this is in the run-up to the Glasgow North East by-election. They've shown Labour to be on 39% as of this month compared to the SNP, which are on just 25%. And they've attributed some of this lack of support to the Glasgow Airport rail link being cancelled, as well as the push for minimum pricing on alcohol, which they haven't had a lot of support from the other parties for. Turning to page 7 of the Herald today, and an unusual row has broken out between two historians. Professor Tom Devine from Edinburgh University has criticised the BBC Scotland series A History of Scotland. This is fronted by Neil Oliver, and he's said that the series is fatally flawed and a sort of Braveheart approach to Scottish history. He's criticised Neil Oliver's long mane of black hair. However, the BBC presenter has called the well-respected academic figure a plump old man and a silly old fool. And BBC Scotland have insisted that it is a serious history programme with 1.6 million Scottish viewers tuning in.
The front page of the Scotsman today comes from their education reporter Fiona MacLeod, and an SNP-led council in the Borders is looking at taking on English-style arm's-length trusts to run schools, as well as bringing in private money. This isn't a policy with a lot of backing from the SNP, but this is an SNP-led council that's looking into it, so it'll be interesting to see where they go from here. And as the minority SNP government are looking increasingly isolated on the issue of the minimum pricing for alcohol, a story on page 17 of the Scotsman, more than 200 children called Childline last year in Scotland and relayed concerns about their parents drinking. This rate is twice as high as the rest of the UK. Elaine Chalmers, head of Childline in Scotland, said that children were expressing fear, anxiety and chronic worry about their parents, and that this kind of situation can have a serious impact on the mental health and well-being of Scottish children. The voice of New Scotland, the Scottish Daily Express, has on its front page a story that credit card charges are going to rise as banks look to eliminate their bad debts and consumers are using their plastic less and less.
They have a quote from Martin Lewis of moneysavingexpert.com, and confusingly he's said, debt isn't bad, but bad debt is bad. I think he's referring to the £2,000 average UK credit card debt.
And on page 4 of the Scottish Daily Express, more than 2/3 of Scots would back a change in the law to allow assisted suicide. The story goes on to say that support is highest for the law amongst people aged between 35 and 44, but they found that support for the law falls away among older people. More than 100 people have voluntarily ended their lives at Swiss suicide clinic Dignitas, but First Minister Alex Salmond has recently said that he's not convinced by plans to change the law.
And that was a roundup of the top stories in the Scottish press today. Thank you for joining us.
We'll see you tomorrow morning.